The overlooked story of the soldiers of African descent who fought for Canada in the War of 1812. In the United States of America, every February, the Army celebrates and pays tribute to black soldiers and commemorates the important contributions they have made in past wars and continuing to make today in overseas operations. Most of these black soldiers played active roles in the US and Canada during the 19th century. However, down the history line, the story of their sacrifices or importance to these nations have often been overlooked. The story of these soldiers of African descent who were more than relevant in the War of 1812 between Canada and the United States many a time is buried and glossed over by Canadian authorities. For instance, there was a virtual blackout in black pioneers when it comes to snowshoeing in the Canadian space. But historical accounts reveal that soldiers of African descent snowshoed over 1,000 kilometers for about 50 days from Fredericton, NB to Queenston, ONT, according to the Conversation.com. And also, the black officers were part of the 104th New Brunswick Regiment of Foot. They began this journey on February 16, 1813, through the banks of the frozen St. John, Madawaska and St. Lawrence rivers until they reached their final destination in Queenston in April 1813. The objectives of the 104th New Brunswick Regiment of Foot was to strengthen the Canadian defense system against the looming invasion by the US. The war was referred to as the War of 1812, though the communal clashes lasted for over 2 years. In this video, I'm going to be presenting the overlooked story of the soldiers of African descent who fought for Canada in the War of 1812. Many historians have criticized Canadian authorities for the conscious culture of erasing the contributions of black people from mainstream Canadian history, raising questions about Canada's commitment to matters of respecting race, slavery, and genocide. The only period there is mentioned of the people of African descent is where there are talks about the Underground Railroad and how many gained their freedom from slavery in the Great White North. There is a deliberate silence in Canada's involvement in the 200 years of slavery on its soil and how it shapes the existence of persons of black origin. But for the indigenous technology and survival tactics employed by soldiers of African descent, the 104th Battalion march would have been more daunting. War of 1812. So the War of 1812 was fought by the United States of America and its indigenous allies against the UK and its allies in the British North America, with limited participation by Spain and Florida. It began when the United States declared war on 18 June of 1812, and although peace terms were agreed upon in the December 1814 Treaty of Ghent, did not officially end until the peace treaty was ratified by Congress on 17 February 1815. Tensions originated in long-standing differences over territorial expansions in North America and British support for Native American tribes who opposed US colonial settlement in the Northwest Territory. These escalated in 1807 after the Royal Navy began enforcing tighter restrictions on American trade with France and press-ganged men claiming as British subjects, even those with American citizenship certificates. Opinions in the US were split on how to respond, and although majority in both the House and Senate voted for war, they divided along strict party lines, with the Democratic Republican Party in favor and the Federalist Party against. News of British concessions made in an attempt to avoid war did not reach the US until late July, by which time the conflict was already underway. What actually caused the war? The origins of the War of 1812 were in conflict that raged in Europe for almost 2 decades after Napoleon Bonaparte became first consul, later Emperor of France. These Napoleonic wars between 1799 and 1815 caused Great Britain to adopt measures that greatly aggravated the United States. On the 21st of November 1806, Napoleon ordered a blockade of shipping aimed at crippling British trade. He ordered all European ports under his control closed to British ships and further decreed that neutral and French ships would be seized if they ever visited a British port before entering a continental port, the so-called Continental System. Great Britain responded to Napoleon Bonaparte with a series of orders in council requiring all neutral ships to obtain a license before they could sail to Europe. Following the victory of Lord Nelson at Trafalgar on 21st October 1805, Great Britain had the sea power to enforce its blockade of France. For many years, the Americans had grappled with the problems of being a neutral nation in the Great European War. Tensions mounted as the British began stopping American ships from trading in Europe. Even more vexing was the British practice of searching American vessels for contraband, defined by the British as goods they declared illegal, and of searching for deserts who had fled the harsh conditions of the Royal Navy. In fact, many of these deserters had taken jobs on American ships, but American certificates of citizenship made no impressions on the British. Moreover, some British captains even tried to impress or seize the native-born Americans and put them into service on British ships. People of African descent in early Upper Canada. The first substantial settlement of Black Canadians in British North America occurred following the American Revolution. Some, such as Richard Pierpont, a formerly enslaved man from Bundu, Senegal, and military veteran of the Revolution, had gained their freedom by fighting under the British Crown during the war. Most, however, were enslaved and therefore brought to the British territories as spoils of war or as the property of loyalists. About 500 to 700 Black people lived in Ontario, Upper Canada, by the time Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe arrived there in 1792. Simcoe wished to abolish enslavement entirely, but the Upper Canada legislature opposed many of his reforms. Many of the members of both houses of the legislature either enslaved Black people or were from slave-holding families and were therefore concerned over the possible economic impact abolition would bring. As the Harriet Tubman Institute for Research in Africa and its Diasporas at York University points out, it is difficult to know which soldiers in the colored corps were free and which were enslaved. The All-Black Canadian Corps. During the war era, the possibilities of an American invasion posed a major threat to the liberties enjoyed by some Black Canadians, leading many Black men to join the militia. Many understood that American victory could lead to re-enslavement. Free Black men had served in the militia since its organization in 1793. However, the formation of an independent company composed entirely of Black men was not proposed until the eve of the War of 1812, when Richard Pierpont offered to raise a corps of Black men in the Niagara region. The offer was initially rejected by the Upper Canada government, but reconsidered following the American occupation of Sandwich or Windsor on 12 July 1812. By late August, the core of an all-Black Canadian company had formed in Niagara as part of the 1st Lincoln Militia, but instead of granting Richard Pierpont command, the honor was bestowed to a local white officer, Captain Robert Runcie. Characterized as a worthless, troublesome malcontent by his superiors, Runcie fulfilled his reputation for poor leadership by segregating Black men from other militiamen. In some cases, Runcie hired out Black soldiers as domestic servants to other officers. Not surprisingly, recruiting in the Niagara Peninsula proved difficult, and Runcie's company of colored men remained small. In early October, however, 14 Black soldiers were transferred to the units from the 3rd York Militia. The majority of men in the corps lived in Upper Canada, in towns and villages in the Niagara region, in York, present-day Toronto, and the Bay of Quinte near Belleville. Battle of Queenston Heights. On the morning of 13th October 1812, American forces under Major General Stephen Van Rensselaer III invaded Upper Canada by crossing the Niagara River at Queenston. Runcie's company marched to Queenston from Port Fort George with Major General Roger Schofi's reinforcements, arriving after Sir Isaac Broke's death that same day. The company joined Captain John Norton's Six Nations warriors in sniping at the American position from atop Queenston Heights before forming part of Schofi's battle line. Alongside the 41st Regiment of Foot and 49th Foot, Runcie's company fired a single volley with considerable execution and then charged with a tremendous tumult, bringing about the American surrender. Having absented himself on the morning of the battle, Runcie subsequently resigned and the company was commanded temporarily by Lieutenant James Cooper of the 2nd Lincoln Militia. Cooper was cited in dispatches as having led his men with great spirit. 1813 Campaigns. Renamed the Colored or Black Corps, the company entered general service and spent the winter at Fort George. On 27 May 1813, a large American force launched an amphibious attack against the fort. The colored corps and British troops rushed the beach to oppose the landing and exchange a destructive and rapid fire, with the enemy at short range. The colored corps lost 4 of its men, wounded or captured, before it was forced back by naval gunfire. It retreated, however, with Brigadier General John Vincent's troops to Burlington Heights. For the remainder of the year, the Colored Corps participated in the blockade of the American Army at Fort George, enduring the same harsh conditions and privations as British troops. Black Canadians in British service. In addition to serving in militia units, other Black Canadians enlisted in the regular British forces and served in Upper Canada. One of the most common roles was as percussionist in military bands. An officer of the 104th Foot recalled the regiment's bass drummer, Private Henry Grant, accompanying his regiment's epic winter march through the snow from New Brunswick to Upper Canada between February and April 1813. After reaching Queenston, he and the band took part in the Battle of Sackett's Harbour on 29 May 1813, in which several band members were killed. Some British regiments permitted individual Black Canadians to enlist as combatant soldiers during the War of 1812. Several men are known to have served in the ranks of the Clonglarry Light Infantry Forcibles, and an unarmed black man was noted by an American officer as having been killed in action during the defense at Fort George in May 1813. More unusually, the entire pioneer squad of the 104th Foot was comprised of Black Canadians. One of those men, Private John Baker, was wounded at Sackett's Harbour and recovered to fight in the battles of Chippewa and Lundy's Lane during the summer of 1814. Conclusion and legacy. The Royal Engineers continued to employ the Colored Corps in the Niagara Peninsula for the remainder of the War of 1812. The Corps' zeal in these works duly impressed British engineers, one reporting in February 1815 that no people could be better calculated to build temporary barracks than these free men of color, as they are in general expert axemen. The company was disbanded on 24 March 1815, following the end of the war. In claiming rewards for their service, many faced adversity and discrimination. Sergeant William Thompson was involved and informed he must go and look for his pay himself, while Richard Pierpont, then in his 70s, was denied his request for passage home to Africa in lieu of a land grant. When grants were distributed in 1821, veterans of the Colored Corps received only 100 acres, half that of their white counterparts. Many veterans did not settle the land they were granted because it was of poor quality. Despite these inequities, the Colored Corps defended Canada honorably, setting the precedents for the formation of Black units in future. Thanks for watching. Be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on post notifications. Also share with me your thoughts in the comment section below.